better roll them dice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll them dice. You better roll them dice. You never know.
Oh yeah, it's a crossover episode.
I think Matt has to lead us off.
Am I going to cross the streams on this? Or
Yeah.
put it on both? I don't know what I'm going to do.
What is this? A crossover episode? Starring what's
The other podcast is On Top of the
That's
World.
right. I'm sorry, I was
A world history podcast.
misremembering. I'm subscribed. I even listen sometimes, but
Hell yeah.
Yeah, you gave us our first 4-star rating, Rob. That was really nice
That's
of you.
right. Thank you. Yeah.
that was the first review I'd ever written, and I did not realize that you were only supposed to give 5 stars to anything. So sorry, guys.
We knew it meant more. You put the thought into it to actually like leave a star off there. It was
You gave us room to improve.
for growth.
Room for growth.
All right.
So
Okay, do you want me to get us started then?
yeah, go get started.
Sure, Dave.
All right. Welcome to On Top of the World, a world history podcast. I'm Dave Eaton.
And I'm Matt Derwinski, and today we have a extremely special guest because he's more than a guest.
Hi, I'm Rob. I am Matt's co-host on a different podcast, Dungeon Master of None, of which this is our cross episode, our crossing of the streams, our merging of the two worlds, our planar convergence, if you will.
I mean, there's no point in doing a crossover episode. Savvy listeners will know that all podcasts are part of a shared cinematic Tommy Westphal-like universe. So
That's right.
It's all in the head of a young boy staring into a snow globe.
That's exactly right.
And if we want to give a different introduction, you're listening to Dungeon Master of None. I'm Dungeon Master Matt.
I'm Dungeon Master Rob, and we have a very special guest.
I'm Dave Eaton.
So I can just switch these in.
I love it. Keep them both in, man. Keep them both in. Because this is
Might as
crossover
well.
history for our podcast anyways. I don't believe we've ever done this before. So I got all sorts of voices in my head right now, and I am just going to roll with it. Like,
Do you have the voices of Empire? The voices of lime and salt?
Do you have the voices
trade
of the fallen?
winds,
And
I hear
and
the
fiat
hierarchic
currency?
Yeah.
qualm rippling through my brain.
Yes. Tighten your encrastic pants because we are diving into Seth K. Dickerson's fantasy novel, The Traitor Baru Cormorant.
Yeah, and I think this
Yeah.
is where some of those ideas of, having a crossover episode surrounding this kind of makes sense, right? Because on the one hand, we do have this fantasy novel, really well-received fantasy novel, and looking at Empire through this particular lens, one that I think connects very nicely to some of the ideas that you guys explore on Dungeon Master of None, but also very much of relevance to world historians, because this book really is, I think, and it makes no effort to hide that it is an effort to grapple with the contradictions of Empire, and particularly for people subjected to it, how they can respond, what types of avenues are available.
So one of the things that becomes, when I first read this, that really stuck out to me was the realization was the question I suddenly had, that why had no one tried to grapple with this before? It seems, it seemed like such a rich field for both, especially for fantasy, but for this particular type of fantasy, and we've had, there's no shortage of empires in fantasy novels, right? But they all tend to be sort of abstracted Roman, overarching, just forceful militaristic types, and there's so much more to it than that, and I was incredibly impressed by the Traitor Baru Cormorant when I read it, and thought that it was incredibly valuable to the fantasy space, but also useful, for thinking about history, which is sort of where we came to this.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about the legacy of fantasy writing in the West, is that it buys in wholesale to Western ideas of empire, of gender, and of race, and very few fantasy novels attempt, even the ones that we may love and enjoy, attempt any sort of deconstruction or critical analysis of what those concepts, empire, sexuality, gender, race, actually mean for people living in their fake worlds. And this novel attempts that.
Yeah, and I do think there is something with fantasy where there's an effort by the authors to kind of connect with who they assume their readers are going to be. And I think a lot of times they assume their readers are going to be young, nerdy white kids. And that when you start from that lens, it does kind of limit how much you can do with other characters or exploring some of these types of themes, which the Traitor Baru Cormorant definitely is able to grapple with. And as you say, when we're talking about gender here, there's so many. Is that where we should start? Is that?
I think we need to give. I think our listeners
let's
know that this is a good thing. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So let's give an overview. Just heads up, this is going to be spoiler heavy, and the reason why it's spoiler heavy is this is sort of our way of getting ready for the release of the sequel to this book, The Monster Baru Cormorant,
which should be out the day this podcast is released, October 30th, 2018.
So we're hoping that you either aren't worried about spoilers or are already familiar with this book, but we will, I mean, no promises. We'll try not to give everything away, but we're gonna cover most of it. But Matt, why don't you give us sort of a brief synopsis, and then we'll start drilling down on themes and ideas from there.
Dave, put 60 standard Canadian seconds on the clock, and I will try and get through this quickly.
You only gave me 47 yesterday. That's not fair.
Well, that's
in 60 seconds. Let's do this.
That's your tax there. All right.
3, 2, 1, go.
A young girl, Baru Cormorant, is from the Western Isles of Terranoke, where she lives with her mother and 2 fathers, a smithy, a shield bearer, and a huntress. Trading empire, the Imperial Republic of Falcrest, comes to her small village. She meets a mysterious merchant, the Caradine Farrier, who inducts her into the Imperial School. Meanwhile, the Empire uses its economic power to take over Baru Cormorant's homeland and cause one of her fathers to disappear. Baru rises through the Imperial ranks, passes the examinations, and lands a position as an Imperial accountant for the Empire's troubled province of Arduin, a sort of weird fantasy French matchup. Baru Cormorant uses some really cool economics and fiat currency and things to suppress a rebellion before falling in with the rebels and falling in love with Tane Hugh. She leads rebel armies. God damn it. Well, she reads a bunch of rebel armies and some more shit goes down and there's a lot of twists and turns. And it's really exciting. And that's it.
One critical thing.
So that's the basic idea.
Matt, is that you should specify that it's Duchess Tane Hugh.
Duchess Tane Hugh.
It's a woman. This is critical to the book.
Yes.
But yeah, so that's a good overview. Dave,
this in case you didn't get, this book is very gay. There's a lot of
super gay, super gay.
Yeah. This book is also just on sort of a more lighter note. Like, this book is extremely horny. In a good way, in a very positive way.
It's a very Look, listen,
I mean, we're all guys here, so without being too, we're not trying to be too lewd or weird, gazy, whatever. But reading this book should make any normal human being horny. It
is a positive.
It's there's a positive horniness, not a weird horniness.
It's a good representation of different sexualities and sexual identities, and it is rare in a fantasy book to have even any sort of sexuality that isn't weird and gross. So major ups to the Traitor Baru Cormorant for representing that across multiple avenues. But yeah, it is a very horny book.
Well, and they do. I think Seth Dickinson does a great job of kind of building that up as a critical theme to this book. That again, for Baru, there's this revenge quest, and that's kind of common in the fantasy genre. But on the other hand, one of the real weaknesses she has is her queerness, and how she has to try and manage that tension that at any moment she could be revealed, and this would be, again, according to the laws of Falcrest, this is deviant behavior. This would be a real problem for her. And so you have that danger on every page that could come out, that her secret could be unraveled, and it really is fascinating. It adds a real tension to the narrative.
To pretty much every paragraph.
Well,
and just for our listeners know, so Baru Cormorant, by joining the Empire, she sort of pledges to herself. She sort of alone in her homeland realizes the sort of vastness and overwhelming economic power of this new empire of Falcrest, the Empire of Masks, and realizes, either rightly or wrongly, that the only way to take it down is from the inside.
Well, there's a lot of themes that we want to talk about. And Dave mentioned gender at the very beginning, and I think we should go there. So I want to just sort
Let's
of
go there.
I want to just preface this by talking about
This whole podcast, this whole book reeks of gender.
Anyways, the whole thing reeks of gender.
Smacks of gender.
Smacks of gender. Overturn the table. So here's the critical thing: is this is, again, we've talked about. Seth Dickinson makes no qualms about this, but the book is very explicit about this. It opens, the people of Terranoke have a unique sort of, let's call it some sort of amorous, triad relationship when it comes to raising children, two fathers and a mother or something like that. And so Baru has two fathers and a mother, and it's totally normal to her and all the other children of Terranoke. And then the masks arrive, or the masquerade, the Empire of Masks arrives, and they begin inculcating the children and imposing rules, and in order to continue to make economic gains and trade with the masquerade, the people of Terranoke are forced to sort of bend their society to match that of the Empire of Falcrest. And one consequence of this is that one of Baru's fathers is disappeared, and the other, it is heavily implied, is something like re-educated or something like that, forcibly. And this is when she makes the promise to herself that she's going to bring down the Empire, and that's when she fully commits to her mission of revenge. So this is within the first 50, 100 pages of the book. This is a critical this complication over gender and sexuality is at the very heart of the book. And so I know Dave wanted to talk about gender and sexuality in general, but this is, I think, starting from where you need to think about it with regards to this book.
Yeah, no, and I mean, and you're right. I think to bring up the term, I think the Empire uses tribadis or something like that. And
so
the argument is
the law
that
of strict limited inheritance dictates that all family units should be, one man and one woman.
And this fits into the kind of genetic science, pseudoscience, scientific racism that is very much practiced by the leaders of this empire. And, I think, again, with the gendered stuff, there's so much really just subtle kind of casual events that really reveal how damaging this process could be. And the one I'm thinking about involves a cousin of Baru's, who is found to be to have deviant urges, and ends up the plan, at least for one of the Falcrest teachers, is to kind of sexually assault her as almost a form of therapy, at least in the eyes of the Empire, but obviously in the eyes of Baru Cormorant, this is kind of an inexcusable sexual assault. And so one of her first connections with Aminata, who we can talk about a little bit more later, but part of what she's asking her to do initially is to help fend this off. And when we think about residential schools and their history in the United States or Canada, when we think about those dynamics of power and the way ideology of empire could be used to kind of twist people's perception of what was normal in their own culture or what type of behavior was appropriate, I really do think this does a nice job of, just in some of these vignettes of day-to-day life, kind of bring that right to the surface. And yeah, that was one example that I really thought was well written in terms of exemplifying that idea.
Yeah, I mean, so we as historians know this, but not everybody. You don't really get in most primary schooling a good education in a lot of the subtler and more insidious forms of control that Empire forces on people, and that includes things like forms of categorization and medical and hygienic controls. That was one of the really interesting things about the Empire of Masks, is these people who force social adherence to the Falcrest way are called social hygienists, or it's all about a hygienic lifestyle, and that word is very chilling, and it's one that's used in a lot of imperial documents in history. British and French empires in India and Indochina were obsessed with hygienics and with cleanliness and with imposing a sort of medical doctrine on the people there. And this I found to be particularly compelling and also chilling in the Traitor Bar Cormorant.
Yeah, this whole idea of hygienics is sort of it's broader, right? In that the Empire of Masks brings some basic knowledge about disease that maybe the people of Terranoke don't really have. We find out later that the Empire of Masks will use that as a weapon when it needs to. But it also, it has inoculations against disease, ideas about, how you might get infected from eating tainted or drinking tainted water and stuff like that. But it's also mostly about ideas of gender and family and ways to control it. And these opening chapters, there are just so many moments like this of subtle control, like the Falcresti, the Empire of Masks ally with Baru's sort of native society, the Terranoke, on their annual kind of war games, but they transform that war, which traditionally was a sort of a more ritualized form of warfare, into an outright slaughter of their enemies, which completely upends the political balance on her home island, and allows the Empire of Masks to move in wholesale. So it's just all these little changes cascade, and by the time Baru Cormorant leaves school, basically her homeland is gone in a way, right?
But one thing I do want to point out that I really like, and kind of as we move forward in the book, you begin to see examples of this, is there's still a very rich variety of different gendered behaviors that you encounter in the book that are really, really fascinating to me, and suggest that the Empire's view is certainly not the only view, but it's not even the only necessarily prevalent view.
Oh, that's a great point.
And one I do like is there's an example drawn here where Baru has to learn how to paint a mask on her face to disguise herself after her duel with the governor. And so she's trying to kind of conceal herself, and she needs to use makeup, and she doesn't know how. And there's this just casual aside that, how do you know how to use, this makeup so well? And she says, oh, my parents learned it from the lawmen. And she's like, and just in her mind, she's just like, oh, the lawmen, they're people with a non-binary gender who are masters of using makeup so that they can pass as either men or women when they're on ships in areas controlled by the Empire.
Yeah.
Which, again, is just a fascinating but very useful aside. And I remember reading an analysis of some Star Trek The Next Generation episodes, and they were saying, listen, there are so many places in that show where they could have just said, okay, this Romulan is fleeing from his homeland because he was persecuted, say, for his homosexuality. And Star Trek could really use those asides to kind of make a kind of case for what's normal, what's appropriate behavior, all that, but they didn't do it. Because at the time it was made, I think the producers of Star Trek didn't think that the audience was ready for it.
The Star Trek writers have been cowards so many times, especially in the 90s, early aughts, when they had a chance to do something great.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Sorry, did I just dredge up some old wounds there? I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
Well, and I think this is a good point to make a broader point about the Traitor Brew Cormorant. If you're reading this book, just sort of a general warning, like this book is so fucking dark in so many places. As you're reading it, you get this overwhelming feeling of the totality of empire, and relating to our point on gender, right? Ideas of what is hygienic from this imperial force, the Empire of Masks. But as Dave said, right, and this is, I think, a great lesson for anyone who's listening to this podcast to think about world building, is constantly and you sort of have to look for it a little bit. There are these asides of these alternative ideas of this conception from these non-binary people that trace their origin back to the Oronati, a sort of Carthage-like set of confederations set up against the empire, or you casually run in and find there's still a people called the Belthics, who are hunter-foragers still living in the land that is nominally controlled by the empire, to the Imperial Navy, which has sort of a different gendered hierarchy than the rest of the empire. That is in some ways subversive to mainstream imperial ideas.
I mean, it is a very dark book, and I think as I keep saying, it's a very clear-eyed vision of what is so terrible and insidious about the way that empire enacts its will on people. The beginning is again, there's plenty of very sad parts of the book, but the beginning is very sad. Because you very quickly see, the Empire of Masks arrives to trade, and then just by virtue of wanting that trade, wanting that value, making small adjustments, making treaties, allowing the Empire of Masks to build an embassy on Terranoke, you can just watch the ways that an empire can, enact its will on people without needing guns or cannons or anything like that. We traditionally have an idea of empire as, being conquest oriented, but the most, and listen, I'm not going to be a historian here. The most disgusting thing about empire, the most, cruel and, oppressive parts of it are, the bureaucracy, are the ways that social controls are enforced on the people who want to interact with an empire, the way that it tries to make everything the same, the way that it tries to categorize and put people into, functional boxes. And you see that very clearly in the beginning of the Traitor Brew Cormorant. And that's particularly, as I keep saying, chilling and difficult to read about. And I think that's, one of the inciting moments of the book, one of the things that drives Baru to, her ultimate end.
I think that's a good spot to take a quick break and talk more broadly about the idea of empire in the Traitor Brew Cormorant. The Imperial Republic of Falcrest, the Masquerade, the Empire of Masks, is a sort of unique world-building thing in a fantasy book. This is an empire that rules not through its magic or overwhelming military power, but through its bureaucracy, its technocracy, and through its currency and economic might. So there's a lot to unpack here, Matt, in the discussion of empire in this book.
Matt, I know you want to talk about fiat currency. Do you just want to go nuts on that and just
the fiat currency is I would say the episode regarding fiat currency is the climax of the book. So let's try to we're gonna come
this
to that.
This is the nerdiest thing you could ever base a book on, but it's also incredibly cool because it lets Brew Cormorant, our protagonist, have a skill set that is not sort of the traditional protagonist hero's skill set. Is that she's good at math and geometry and calculus and economics, right? Mm-hmm. She's really good at logistics.
Yes, she is. It's incredibly difficult to write a book in which the protagonist genuinely outsmarts their foes. That's just like a very, very difficult thing to write convincingly, because you, the writer, have to be smarter than your protagonist somehow, and smarter than everybody who's reading it. And this pulls it off very well. It's also a totally unique approach. Nobody has, as far as I know, tried to make accounting the centerpiece of anyone's heroic journey, but it happens here. So if you are excited about actuarial gymnastics, then this is the book for you, folks.
If you want some exciting double column bookkeeping, it happens, and it is actually genuinely exciting. Yeah. I mean, it's hard for me to judge, but I'm a little too close to it. But yeah, no, it is exciting. But the thing, and we're slowly, we unfold this idea of the Imperial Republic of Falcrest. We learn that they sort of are ruled by ostensibly an emperor and a parliament, that they overthrew their own corrupt aristocracy, and through their sort of ideas of science and reason are slowly taking over a I got the feeling of like half Indian Ocean, half Mediterranean Sea region of the world. And they seem unstoppable, at least to our protagonist.
From what we're led to believe, there's one loose federation that lost a war to them and doesn't seem capable of standing up to them in the future, and they're on the rise and unchallenged in this region of the world.
They're really like we mentioned before, into very much remaking things. They rename Baru's homeland Terranoke Southward, sort of a generic imperial name. And one of the things I really wanted to talk about in the way their empire functions is that we learn about, we get some clues early on, but we learn about halfway through the book that the empire is actually controlled by a shadow council of, I forget their exact name, of uber technocrats who balance each other perfectly and have cool names like Caradine, Farrier, and Agonist, and Apparator, and things like that. And Baru's goal is to ultimately join this elite shadow council of prime movers of imperial strategy. What did y'all think about this sort of approach to imperial power?
Am I allowed to put on my historian hat briefly here? Because I think what's going on, and I mean, this won't be a surprise to either of you, but I do think this is very heavily based on the British imperial experience, and I really believe that there are echoes of what went on in the British Empire with the type of rule you see here. And certainly there were people in the British Empire who thought they were part of this type of shadow committee. And I'm thinking of people like Milner, of Cecil Rhodes, of the sort of the very, very wealthy, the very well-connected, who had really strong views on Anglo-Saxons and how Anglo-Saxons were kind of destined to reunite and rule the world for this benevolent purpose that they never really quite articulate. And I really do think that when... Because Baru Cormorant, she talks to her servant, and she describes the Empire of Masks as a cryptarchy, the rule of secret.
Oh yeah, they're cryptarchs. That's what they're called.
That's right.
Cryptarchs.
I love that.
Which is
I
such
love
a
that
cool
phrasing.
fucking name.
Good word.
He comes up with the coolest name for basically everything in this book.
So I love that. I really do, and I think that's where that's coming from. Yeah.
And I keep like hammering this point, but it's the thing that makes empires powerful, and Dickerson recognizes this is organization. It's bureaucracy. It's forms and letters, and really like tedious methods of control, but they allow you to administer, extend your power across such a broad space. More so than the sum of your cannons, or even necessarily all of your wealth. And the Empire of Masks, especially once you learn that it's really these shadow technocrats behind the scenes, that really embodies that type of, like Dave said, British, late, French, German empires, all of these, very, very structured and rule-based, hierarchical, methods of control and imperial projects. Cecil Rhodes is definitely an interesting person to bring up here for sure.
And one of the interesting things in asking these big questions of the Empire is I noticed at the very beginning of the book, Beru, as a child, echoes kind of a question that we've seen in a lot of popular writing about history. She asks her mother, why did the Empire of Masks, why did they come here to Terranok? Why did our traitors not come to them? Like, why are they here and why aren't we there? Like, why are they more powerful than us? And Seth Dickerson's answer is definitely, for Empire, it's organization.
And he's on very solid ground with that. And I think that's missed in a lot of the heroic epics, right? When fantasy...
Seth Dickerson's better than Jared Diamond at this. Oh, no.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Oh, Jared.
Well, and this is also, this is something that I think is, really worth discussing. The way that, say, the census, the Beru Cormorant kind of manipulates to get a read of Erdwin and try and get a sense of who might be loyal to her, or the way that, there's echoes of this type of stuff in, a book I might recommend later, like Nicholas Dirk, Casts of Mind, where he talks about how census categories help the British identify and then rule a variety of people through India. And Dirks' argument is certainly that in a lot of ways, Empire created caste divisions in a way that hadn't really existed before. And, that use of bureaucracy as a tool of governance, I think is, again, I see Erdwin is a bit of a sort of stand-in for India in this case. I don't know if that's entirely accurate. I was trying to, wrap my head around.
Just for our listeners, a great majority of the plot takes place in Ardwin, which is like Beru Cormorant's homeland of Terranok, a recently conquered imperial province. It's difficult to be conquered, though, because it's ruled by a group of like 12 or 13 competing feudal dukes. It is a little like India in that there's a huge diversity of terrain and stuff. I also got kind of echoes of France in that there's like olive oil and wine on the coast and, grain in the north.
This is one of the bar for this is very low, but one of the subversive things that Dickerson does in this book, in that the masks are ambiguously brown, and they are the ones doing the European style conquering. And so this is a very easy pole shift, but Matt is right in that Erdwin is vaguely Northern European. It's cold and rocky, right. And
there are recognizable feudal structures, right? Duchies and dukes and things.
Iron and fish and salt and things, and but Dave is right in that the relationship is very much like that of Britain to India.
Yes.
Yeah.
Since we're talking a little bit about the setup of the Imperial Republic of Falscrest, but is the Empire of Masks too evil, too perfect as a conception of empire? Because at least from the perspectives we're giving in the book, their rise and power seems completely unstoppable. They're developing human weapons of conditioning and obedience that seem like they're ready to remake the very face of the world. Their rule by Cryptarch seems like it's infallible. Are they too powerful, too evil to be believable?
No. I did not read it that way at all. I read it the very opposite way. Like Governor Cattleson, like
He's such a great character.
It can seem that way, but again, we're all historians here. Anything you put in a fiction book will probably not come close to anything as sinister as what has actually happened in a real life historical empire. It is difficult to overstate again, just given the scope, but even in isolated incidents, how truly oppressive and cruel some, 18th and 19th century empires were. So the Empire of Masks, and I gotta say, you know, if you lived in
if you're in India in 1880 or you know Nigeria turn of the century, right?
Then it does seem impossible, right? Because your scope, like you don't have the vision of European politics or like a world historical perspective. You just know that you're in India and everybody is trying to, you know, make the best of this, you know, sudden influx of foreigners, and it seems like their advance is inexorable and unstoppable. So I don't think that's in any way unrealistic.
The only book I've read that has ever given me this like feeling before, I think, is Things Fall Apart.
I wanted to mention this at the end.
Am I allowed to push back? Push back.
No, go ahead, Dave. Sorry.
No, I mean, okay. So the one thing, again, Cattleson, guys like that, again, do not the Empire does not seem omnipotent to me in this sense. But the other thing that I really like, and I was just reading it before this. There's a line where Baru Cormorant gets the clarified purity cartone, and she basically asks him to tell her, you know, what he knows about her. And he has this this statement where he basically says, like, yeah, you're really, really smart, but you also struggle with this idea that anyone else can be an agent, and you might become a full-blown sociopath because of it.
Right.
And I love that term, because, again, there is this sense. And sometimes I think when we read this, you can get carried away with this idea that only the Empire has agency in this. Yeah. But I think part of what Dickinson's doing in that... Baru is
a little metonym for the Empire as a whole here.
Right. That again, you can't assume that only one group of people are agents in this process. And again, she's making choices throughout, even from a subservient position, that there are, you know, in Erdwin, there's so many different factions to be appeased and negotiate with, that I think the limits of imperial power are actually laid out pretty clearly. I mean, again, I know we've said spoilers, but the involvement in the rebellion of some of the highest officials in Erdwin, again, this really reveals again that the Empire of Mass might be more of a facade than it is you know, sort of unlimitedly powerful or something like that.
Right, and we might as well talk about this now. We're going to have to talk about it eventually, but that's right. The thing. So,
like, major spoilers here.
Major critical spoilers here, but this is the big part of this, is that the weakness of the Empire is revealed quite critically in the book, because essentially Erdwin's rebellion or second rebellion more or less succeeds, only to be squashed because it turns out Baru Cormorant was
a traitor.
A traitor,
like the title. They tried to tell you.
They tried to tell you. But I think this is like very brilliant, because it shows both the power of the Empire, right, which is its people, which is its control over its own bureaucrats and technocrats, but also the fact that it is weak, and somebody like Baru Cormorant has the opportunity to take advantage of that.
It's crazy that we've talked so much about the world building. The plot of the last quarter of the book is just some of the most gripping writing and characterization of Baru faced with this decision. You know, as I mentioned earlier, she has fallen in with a rebellion led in part by the Duchess Tane Hugh, who becomes her, you know, best friend, confidant, and eventual lover. She has to betray all that for her dream of joining this mysterious cryptarchy of the Empire of Masks.
Yeah, and we really should clarify that we're talking a lot about world building and about history, but this is just a great book, period. It's tremendous read. So even if you're not interested in all those things, absolutely read it. But it also is just like a tour de force of intelligent world building and like really well thought out characterization and relationship to that world.
Yeah, it's very, very similar to Robert Jordan.
Robert Jordan, also careful consideration of empire, pulling of ideas from history without reproducing, oh, well, this is fantasy China. This is fantasy the Middle East. There's none of that in Robert Jordan.
Oh, definitely not.
Well, yeah, and speaking of the characterization, who are some of y'all's favorite characters who are not Baru Cormorant, and why are they great?
Ooh.
Oh, that's a good question.
You know what?
I got a couple.
I do. I kind of enjoy Governor Cattleson a little bit.
Oh, love that boy. He's just so sincere.
And he has some pretty solid like mansplaining and race-splaining to Baru that I'm just like, oh yeah, I recognize that guy. And he
yeah, your Tumayu heritage is just gonna cause you to be. He totally calls her hysterical at one point, and this is another thing we didn't get to on gender, which is that even as the rebellion is rejecting some imperial ideas of gender, right, there are other ideas of gender that the protagonists Tain Hugh and Baru have to fight against, right?
Mm-hmm.
I care deeply for the opportunities we provide to those of less fortunate birth.
Yes.
I genuinely
he is
want
a
you to succeed.
Totally bought into the romance of this provincial place, Ardwin, of its horseback riding and stag hunting and nobility, right? Which is an idea that for the Falcresti is bad, but he loves it, right? But he's also a committed imperialist.
Mm-hmm. I'm a big fan of Cardine Ferrier. Just this, this big soft man who also happens to be, happens to wield, an impressive amount of power and is just like such a great face for the masquerade. Somebody whose real influence and power and strength, comes from subtle, soft forms of control. I think he's, he's a very minor character in lots of parts of the book, but I enjoyed him a lot.
There are a ton of amazing minor characters who you don't think are going to matter at all, but then suddenly do. But no, I guess I gotta go with, since no one's brought her up, the sort of other protagonist, at least of the second half of the book, which is the Duchess Volchag, Tain Hugh, she's a badass brigand duke who loves her people and loves freedom and fucks around and smashes a lot and is a lot of ways an opposite of Baru in that she's a little more ruled by instinct and passion instead of numbers and nerdcraft.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, she's amazing, and we would all die for her.
She is amazing. There are some really great. I mean, every character is like really great in this book. But
let's see, are there other things that cross over? The one other big thing I think of a crossover between history and fantasy world building. We talked about how characters can't see the limits of the action they're in, of the totality of the Empire of Masks, and how Baru is completely convinced they will control the world forever and ever. One of the other things that's maybe a little more subtle that I wanted to talk about is in characters' speech and actions, the sort of reproduction, whether wittingly or unwittingly, of Falcresti ideas of race and hygiene. Even people who are opposing the Empire, you can see Falcresti ideas infiltrating their way of thinking when they talk about race or bloodlines or hygiene.
That's really interesting. Sorry, Dave, you have something on this?
People who maybe didn't have the same ideas about race, like the rebel Ardwini talking about sort of the inheritance of different bloodlines, and even though like their whole goal in life is to get rid of these invaders, right? They have forever now picked up their ideas of race, even the ones who are saying they're fighting against it, which we could also mention the racism in this book operates in many ways exactly the same as racism in the real world, but in many ways it's very different. The evil empire in this book is obsessed with the strength of each bloodline and encouraging sort of a forced miscegenation, I guess might be the right term, in order to breed control into its citizens. They also have ideas about actions that influence the heritable genes or heritable cells of people. So they're very concerned that people don't do things that will affect their genetics.
Actually, this makes me think of something No, this is a great point. This makes me think of something interesting about this book, and to me, this highlights the obvious, fallacy behind racism and sexism in general. But that one unique thing about the Empire of Masks is that it seems that women are definitely able to serve in both the military and in government to a more or less equitable degree, and also their ideas on race, as Matt mentioned, are weirdly based not around this color of your skin, but bizarre social functions and things that affect your bloodline, which I think highlights the just sort of arbitrary nature of how racism and sexism work, because there are still some like pretty ridiculous ideas in the book about among the masquerade about like what is good and how people should function and what your relationship to race and gender is. And I think this is a potentially very good like educational tool for thinking about empire and how a lot of bigotries that we are still dealing with in the 21st century came to be.
Right, and it's a great opportunity for readers can, easily unpack the ways that empire and conceptions of what is science and scientific are constructed, because you see these imperial people being like, oh, you've got to dig a latrine ditch or you're going to all get dysentery. And you're like, oh, hey, that's science. That's true. And that is how that kind of works. And then they also say, well, you better not do this one action because it will corrupt your heritable cells, and you'll pass that genetic information on. And they're like, in the book, they're like, oh, well, yeah, that's accepted science. Everyone knows that. And then we're like, wait a second, that's not how genes work.
Right. Again, it's just none of this is particularly, if you've studied Empire, particularly groundbreaking. It's just so rare to see this in a fantasy novel. Particularly interesting and clever and well-written ones tend to have a pretty two-dimensional idea of what an empire is. And this is, as far as I know, one of the few, if maybe the only one, that deals with a lot of these more subtler aspects of how, especially like a colonial empire, deals with its subjects. And little things like renaming, race science, categorization, bureaucracy. It's very weird and creepy and insidious.
Yeah, there's so many different aspects of real empire that are kind of brought up in this book that, again, they draw on real world antecedents, but they absolutely kind of, again, I think because they're presented in a fantasy way, they might not necessarily get students' ire up quite the same way if you were presenting these critiques directly of a British Empire. And it might make it a little more universal and might offer a more accessible entry point. Because, again, you don't always encounter that, but every once in a while you might. And it certainly does happen in the context of teaching colonialism in sub-Saharan Africa, where many students will kind of, they'll say, well, yeah, the empire was bad, but on the other hand, the advanced technology that they had, like rule, was almost preordained, that it was almost inevitable that they would conquer and then subjugate. And like, but then they left and it's fine. And it's like, well, no, it's not fine. And here's why. Here are some of the elements that go beyond just the military and political aspects of conquest and get into the much more durable, I would argue, elements that remain. And one of the things that I love here is, again, in my Africa classes, I often teach a history of homosexuality in Africa as a sort of two-class arc. And you really notice a difference in the way people perceive homosexuality prior to the arrival of the British, the French, and the empires, and then after. And in a lot of ways, I think some of the demonization of alternative forms of sexuality is really, today, it's endemic across sub-Saharan Africa. It's very, very common. The level of homophobia there is often far, far greater than you would experience, say, in Canada or the United States or Europe. And it's, to me, it's, again, one of these legacies of empire. It's something that changed. Prior to that, you have, certainly in Kenya, among the Kikuyu, you have female husbands. Again, these aren't necessarily homosexual relationships, depending on the way they're sort of the sort of details of how they're brought into being. But again, there was some space for that type of thing that will be ruthlessly stomped out by the British. But one thing, am I allowed to ask a question here? Because this is something that I find
There are no rules here, Dave. Do whatever you want.
Okay. So what is up with...
Is it an encrastic question?
It is, because it's oriented around this issue.
What qualm do you ask? Can you recite the imperial hierarchy?
Something about those who serve
Order
the throne are blameless.
To chaos, Dave. Order is preferable to chaos. All right,
but here's the question. In the British Empire, one of the big things that they committed to stomping out was female circumcision. This was super common in Kenya. Any indigenous African society that circumcised women, for whatever reason, the British found that a real problem. And in their schools and everything, they tried to stamp that out. Here, in this book, you see sort of the opposite. That, again, that's a punishment that is handed out by the empire for those who are unhygienic. And I was wondering what is going on there, because that to me is kind of a fascinating deviation from my understanding of the way empires operated. And I didn't know if you guys had any insight on that or had noticed that, because to me that was just a little bit different than I would have expected if this was based on kind of a British imperial model.
What that makes me think of is not so much the function of empire with regards to forms of social and medical control. That and what happened to Baru's cousin at the beginning makes me think a lot about just the general terribleness of medical science in the 19th century, ideas of hysteria and all these awful treatments for women, often, rape and sometimes circumcision or other sorts of, surgical procedures that did nothing and were awful and punitive in nature. I don't know, even going up to lobotomies done to women in the mid 20th century. So I'm not sure if this is necessarily, I'm not sure if there's anything, well, one, I'm not sure that Seth Dickerson is necessarily trying always to say something about colonialism, but I think here what it makes me often think of is the relationship to just medical science in general, not necessarily the way that it was practiced in the colonies, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it seems like the book's drawing very much on Victorian ideas of sexuality here.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Okay, I think this is a great stopping point to take one final break. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about using this book in the classroom, any other odds and ends we have, some criticisms, and our hopes and dreams for the next book, The Monster Baru Cormorant. Stick around.
Yeah, I'm out at Brooklyn. Now I'm down in Tribeca, right next to De Niro. But I'll be hood forever. I'm the new Sinatra. And since I made it here, I can make it anywhere. Yeah, they love me everywhere. I used to cop in Harlem. All of my Dominicanos right there up on Broadway. Pulled me back to that McDonald's. Took it to my stash spot, 560 State Street. Catch me in the kitchen like a Simmons whipping pastry. Cruising down
So Dave has, we're back, and Dave has already written 3 different syllabi based around this book to teach at the 400 level class. The first one is called Cultural Marxism and the Traitor Baru Cormorant, a deconstruction of gender, race, and empire through a social justice warrior lens. Dave, tell us about your class.
I kind of want to title the class after a quote from Jay-Z when he visited a Chicago public school and was like, well, not everyone can be a rap star. If y'all want to be an accountant, that's cool too. I'm like,
not everyone can be an imperial accountant. If you want to be a Navy lieutenant, that's okay too.
Yeah, that's fair. So what I wanted to talk about here is just that, again, I mentioned it before the break, just that in some cases dealing with real world situations can be difficult for historians. Sometimes it can be because these are political, very politicized situations that can really determine student responses in ways that can be very problematic. In other cases, it can be a result of the historical method. That, you know, if you want to uncover what's really going on in a dictatorship or really going on in an empire, oftentimes you're limited to types of sources that are very supportive of those things. And trying to break free from that can be a challenge. And one of the things that certainly in African studies has been very common is to incorporate fictional examples, use literature to kind of exemplify larger truths, even if they aren't necessarily oriented around specific individuals or specific moments. And I've done this on a number of occasions in my African history classes, and I think it's something that world historians, it might be worth taking note of, because I think there are opportunities when it comes to this. And yeah, for me, the books that I have used have been the one I do love. I actually love A Man of the People by Chinua Achebe. This is his look at post-colonial corruption, post-colonial challenges in the aftermath of being granted independence. And then the other book is The Wizard and the Crow, which is Ngugi wa Thiong'o's very kind of surrealist interpretation of life that's clearly based on Kenya in the 1980s. Again, Kenya in the 1980s, it's a hard place to get good information out of. You don't have the same level of archival sources. You often have very problematic memories of it. But this book provides this just excellent metaphor for the advent of the democracy movement and the way it's sort of the way the state tries to exert control over it, the different factions within that state, and all that interplay, I think, is actually a very useful teaching tool for helping students understand that moment. And then my last point before I turned over to you guys, but for me, the Traitor Baru Cormorant would be an excellent way to introduce imperial themes to students, to give them an idea of empire that goes beyond just the bare bones military, political, even economics, and gets into a more fine-grained analysis of some of the cultural changes that were going on, some of the ways that societies were rewrote through their encounter with an imperial power, even if they weren't directly having guns pointed at them all the time. And, you know, the choices that Baru Cormorant makes are so gripping and work so well in this fictional setting because they reflect, I think, the very real anguish that many, many people of color experienced as they tried to choose, you know, how much do I side with this empire to try and access its strength? Again, there's countless societies that you could look at as experiencing similar trauma at the moment of imperial conquest.
I think, Dave, that's a great point. This book, I think, is most excellent for teaching students the sort of structural forces that limit and shape the agency of historical people that we want to look at. And if that's a thing that your particular class wants to teach, this book is super useful for that. And as Dave mentioned, right, what kind of, after this imperial encounter, what sort of victory can there be, right? Saying that Baru saves her homeland and the Falcresti are driven into the sea and Terranok is free. It's a different place, right? And it is irrevocably changed.
I agree with Dave, and I think that's a great way to approach it. We've talked about a bunch of things already that have, one-to-one real life analogs that you can use Traitor Baru Cormorant as an approach to, especially if your students are having trouble grappling with, you know, the reality of it. This is a great way to subtly introduce them to certain things. You know, there's like a lot, I think, to be drawn from this book when you're thinking about the impacts of empire.
Well, what about on the non-history side, Rob? Like if you were teaching this in some sort of class on how to be a dungeon master, comparing the world building here to, say, The Wheel of Time or The Lord of the Rings.
Well, so what I think, from an author and a DM perspective, what I think is very, very obvious and impressive and valuable about Seth Dickerson's approach to this book is that he leaves a lot unsaid. It's obvious that there's a deep and rich world going on outside of what happens in the Traitor Bar of Cormorant, which has tons of engaging world building, but there are things that are referenced offhand. There are nations and regions of the world that are
the Stacchiecci mansions with their
That's right.
terraced farming and
Right.
plate mail.
Right.
I just
No.
wanted to know more about them. I
know.
love terrace farming and I
this
love
is
plate
terrific.
mail. So
You get the sense that Seth Dickerson knows what's going on here, and he doesn't tell you.
yeah,
This is
fuck you, Seth Dickerson. Tell me all the things in your. Draw me a
again-
goddamn. All right, yeah.
which is again, just like Robert Jordan, just leaving things
Exactly.
leaving
I was
things
just gonna
unsaid.
say, I really wanted that chapter on a bath.
I don't understand what the Ogier are. Ogier, like, are they an alien? Are they what? Where are they from? I just wanted an answer. I never got one.
Anyway, so this is a good lesson for everybody, and I think like 99% of fantasy authors get this wrong, but you want to tell like just the right amount. You want to know, you, the author, need to know a lot about your world. You do not need to tell your readers everything about it. And this works for DMing as well. This is great for dropping tantalizing hints and getting people interested in, going on quests and doing adventures and biting on hooks. A big problem is big exposition dumps, which there are, as far as I know, none of in the Traitor Bar of Cormorant. The world is revealed through organic conversation and little like bits here and there. And yeah, it's a real masterclass in building a world without bludgeoning your readers over the head with it. It's a great book for this.
Any other thoughts on teaching, whether it's teaching your friends how to play a role-playing game or teaching students with this book?
Try it. I mean, I do feel like, and I totally agree. Again, the brevity of this book for the richness of the world that it creates really is pretty astounding. And again, I think for world history teachers in particular, one of the challenges is a lot of curricula are very much focused on the exact kind of info dump that Robert was kind of mentioning there, where they just want content. They just want a lot of that. And sometimes that content, it can be very hard to make that compelling. And I think, again, there are moments, though, where you can do things like this. And I think Empire in particular is a great place to do it, because it's so easy to get carried away with this place got conquered, then this place got conquered, then this place got conquered. And then they traded in these goods, and then people fought back and gained independence. And that narrative is just so easy and so tantalizing and just so bereft of any meaning and any real understanding of the impact of those moments. And, I don't want to plug my hopefully forthcoming book. The manuscript has been submitted, but the big thing with that book, when I look at Empire, is I try and look at it through shadow puppets. And the way puppet plays are kind of redefined under Dutch colonial rule in Indonesia, and how we can see elements of the power of that colonial moment in their enduring impact on what good shadow puppetry is defined as today, what traditions are defined as today. Again, a lot of the sort of the key moments in the past of many former colonial nations. A lot of that was shaped by that encounter, and the Traitor Bar of Cormorant just makes it 100% clear why that is.
Hell yeah.
Absolutely.
Final, before we move on to maybe some of the things that we weren't too keen on in the book, any other odds and ends, favorite things that don't lead to a longer discussion but are just super cool or super interesting from this book?
Oh, one thing we didn't mention at all, sorry, is that I'm sorry, I should have mentioned this like a long time ago.
Well, you should have.
This might be a longer discussion, but one cool thing about this book is, interesting thing, I guess, is that it is a fantasy novel, but has no or almost no like magic or fantastical elements. There are some subtle things here and there, but there's definitely no. There's certainly, as far as you can tell, aren't any wizards, casting fireballs or anything like that, or centaurs galloping across the plains. There are distinct fantastical elements, but it is much more subtler even by far than Game of Thrones, which, tries to keep the fantasy stuff in the down low, at least for the first couple books, which is really interesting, I think. As we have mentioned, that there are hints of more magical persons and or places, but the Traitor Baru Cormorant does not deal very much with anything that we would consider traditionally fantastical.
Yeah. One of the other, I think that's a great point. One of the other things that is so hard to do in a fantasy novel that this one does so well is that all of the places and languages and cultural traditions feel very real, but I think maybe, as we haven't mentioned, they don't map one-to-one onto anything else, right? We've heard you've heard us describe Arduin as a mix of maybe France or India or a dozen other things, and Baru's homeland of Terranoke is a mix of I don't know, Polynesian and classical North African and just a ton of things, and it's not one thing, and that's really refreshing to see. They all feel very real without this being like, well, you've arrived in fantasy Scotland.
Well, this is another tiny thing is, Terranoke's main export or most valuable export is telescope lenses, which is delightful.
And macadamia nuts,
which is just delightful, and also very there are absolutely places in the world that were conquered because they had one little widget that was insanely popular in Britain or France or whatever, and it's little touches like that are just super great.
If there's no other odds and ends, what didn't do it for us in this book? What was not so great? Criticisms. Was the book too good?
I have to say this is one of my probably top 3 for the past decade or so. The ending was rough. The ending was rough, and I think well earned, but I also feel like it sort of came out of nowhere. I do have an issue with that, but I kind of want to see what the next book is like before I fully articulate that criticism, because the traitor Baru Cormorant, right, the person you meet when she's on Terranoke, and the person who betrays the Arduini, at the very end, basically disappears for 80% of the book, right? She's fully committed to wearing this mask, which is the whole point, right? But also,
right.
It's her internal. It's from her point of view, right? Or it's her internal monologue, and so for that to just entirely vanish for so much of the book, again, I think feels earned and it's well written, but it is a little jarring.
It's also sort of it brings up, and this is a difficult question to answer, right? We all know of the sort of trope in fiction of the sort of tragic queer hero or heroine that is always, gotta sacrifice that. And it brings us to the question at the story of is Baru sort of just falling into that line of that part of the story, or is she subverting it or overcoming it? And it's difficult to say, right? And that's just how it sucks being in a society that has these ideas of what it means to be a queer hero or heroine in a story. Is we have to ask that.
There is the trope of bury your gays, and Traitor Baru Cormorant buries a lot of gays, and it remain again. I mean, the main character is queer, so it's sort of remains to be seen if what the rest of the series looks like. But that is potentially, I guess, problematic, and it's
my only criticism of this book is a little structural, and I think it's my understanding is it started as a novella that is the last quarter of the book.
It was a short story published in Beneath Ceaseless Skies, which is a science fiction fantasy magazine, and I think it was expanded. Yeah, but yeah, this was definitely done in stages, if that, and there are parts where that becomes clear.
The last quarter, I have to say, is near perfect. The world building woven throughout is near perfect. The first quarter of her life at Terranoke is near perfect. The middle section, right, of trying to expand this shorter story into something longer, it can drag a little at times, right? While the world building is all super interesting, there's not a lot happening, and it feels very different to the incredibly dynamic bookends of the beginning and end.
Yeah, I would agree with you guys on all of this. This is one of the top books I've had. I mean, sometimes it feels a little bit too on the nose, maybe, when it comes to, you know, the imperial elements to it. But because I'm coming at it from a historian's perspective, I'm sort of, you know, again, I'm kind of inclined to agree with that. I'm like, okay, I love being able to recognize things that sort of appear here. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, what is it? The
Illikari?
Illikari?
The priests?
That was one thing that I don't know, but I don't know. The suppression of the riots and that type of thing with that acid that burns and people get identified by that, all of that. I was like, but I don't know what I want to say. That whole subplot not subplot. I guess it was an integral part of it, but yeah, I don't know. Did that have magical elements in it? I can't remember.
So the Illikari supposedly, and this could be, you know, priests claiming they have abilities, and they don't, said that they can tell if someone is lying or not. Is that a magic thing given by their gods? Or is that, you know, they've just thought a lot about whether someone's lying or not and believe that they're pretty good at telling when people tell the truth?
Right.
It's unclear. I like that while there are rumors of magic, the sort of protagonist never looks to like, oh, only magic can defeat Empire, which I don't know if I want to get into criticism of other literary genres, but resistance to, you know, oppression remains rooted in human action and human decision, which is always kind of nice.
So I want to bring up another book very briefly here at the end. Have either of you read Robert J. Bennett's Divine City series?
No. Tell us.
No.
So I really like these books. I don't think they have quite the nuanced perspective of Empire that the Traitor Cormorant does, but the central conceit is that there's this a continent which is ruled by gods that conquers the rest of the world, and then the island that the protagonists come from develops a technology that allows them to defeat the gods and reverses this sort of colonial endeavor, you know, conquers the continent and brings it under their control. And it deals very interestingly with, I think, with both that colonial legacy and also the way that history reflects the way memory is created, right? Memory and history. Again, they're a lot more fun than the Traitor Cormorant. They're very good books. I strongly recommend you read them, but they're not quite as grim. They're a lot more adventure-y, swashbuckling books, but Bennett deals with questions of history and memory and empire pretty interestingly as well. And that is something I would recommend if you're interested in these questions, but maybe we can read that and talk about it at a later date. But this is the only other book that this makes me think of.
Excellent. I got to check that out. Dave, do you have a recommendation for us? Is it one of the books you've mentioned before?
Ooh, I would love a history book recommendation, Dave. Can you give us something to read?
Or The Wizard and the Crow? What are you going to pick?
Yeah, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Wizard and the Crow is again excellent look at, you know, Kenya in the 1970s, 80s, maybe early 90s. That book, outstanding. Everyone should read it. I love it. Even though, as I say that, I'm like, it is a bit of a chore to read. It is not accessible. It makes no bones about that. It can be very tough to make sense of, and I still struggle with it, honestly. On the other hand, if you want a book to struggle with that is pure history, and I would strongly recommend Nicholas Dirk's Casts of Mind. And Casts of Mind, again, is very much about the power of data, the way that communities were forced to define themselves by a British administration in India, how this drew new lines between the castes that maybe hadn't necessarily been nearly as rigid before. And to me, that is the essence of imperial power in a lot of ways. And again, it stems directly from the same type of themes that you see with the Traitor Baru Cormorant, the way data can be weaponized as a form of power. So yeah, I would Nicholas Dirk's Casts of Mind would be that one. Matt, what do you got?
Yeah, let's see. I think since you guys have talked about Empire and stuff, I'm going to bring up a book that definitely centers race and gender in the context of Empire in a different imperial setting, and that's Anne Twynham's Purchasing Whiteness, Pardos, Mulattoes, and the Quest for Social Mobility in the Spanish Indies. It's a great book about how the sort of people in the Spanish Indies were able to maneuver themselves socially in what, on the surface, from sort of an imperial perspective, look like hard lines of race and gender, and how, on the ground in Venezuela or Cuba or Mexico, these lines look much different. From a different imperial time period than I think a lot of what we've been talking about, but it's a great book. Highly recommend it. Anne Twynham's Purchasing Whiteness. So I'd love to close out. So as we release this episode, if you have read The Traitor Baru Cormorant, you can go straight into reading the sequel, The Monster Baru Cormorant. Hopes and dreams for the sequel, my friends.
I'm so interested to see what Falcrest itself is like. Of course, we want to see what the Empire of Masks looks like.
I want to see that social. What sort of hierarchy and divisions are there inside the Imperial Heartland? Which, from the periphery, right, we can't see it all. Which is not a criticism of the first book. It's just we can't see those.
I would love also to see Baru start dismantling things from within. Taking her rightful revenge, though I fear we may have to wait for a theoretical third book for that to actually happen.
If I have to wait that long, it's going to be so rough.
Wait. You guys know there's a fourth book now, right?
What?
Yeah, they're doing 4.
Ooh.
Wait, Seth Dickinson is already,
It's a quadrilogy now?
Quadrilogy.
And you know what? I bet this next book is going to be Baru compromising on everything, gonna have to buy into the Empire, gonna have to do even more bad stuff. Just looking at the title.
Yeah, I'll tell you what I would enjoy is for Baru to meet somebody who's her equal, right? Because almost nobody in the Traitor Baru Cormorant is anywhere near as smart or ruthless or cunning as she is, with, I don't know, some very minor exceptions. And so it would be interesting if she gets to Falcrest and finds that, she can't just outsmart everybody, and she has to maybe, like Dave said, compromise and possibly do some things that she's not proud of to advance her mission. So
yeah, she needs a villain, doesn't she?
She does need a villain.
There isn't really.
I mean,
I guess that cryptarchy is sort of the villain, but it's kind of, I don't know.
It needs
it's
needs
odd
a face,
in that, isn't
right?
it? That a lot of fantasy.
Yeah, she needs somebody. Like she has a nebulous enemy, but we need a face of the masquerade, somebody, a villain to challenge her, right? So I'm hoping we're introduced to that person in this book.
My big hope is to see on the sort of the same lines a villain or a rival to the Falcresti Empire, right? If there's anything, I don't believe, Seth Dickerson knows, I think, enough about history to know that never in human history has there ever been a single empire without creating imperial rivals. And I'd love to see more of the resurgent Stacchiecci Empire of Mountains, or a united
Matt,
Ornati.
Are you suggesting that there is any rival to our glorious and undefeated American empire at this moment in time?
No, I would never suggest that. I am very hygienic. My thoughts are encrastic. If you're listening to this podcast, NSA. If any of the purified are listening, please know. I love, there's just this crazy thing of human conditioning sort of replacing the algorithm of state that has emerged in our time. One thing that I'm afraid, and I don't know if I could make it through the book if this happens, if Beru Cormorant goes through a lot and like her life is pretty shitty, and if like she gets like tortured in like one of the imperial conditioning cubes or something, I'll probably just throw the book down. I don't know if I can deal with that. So
life's too short to be miserable reading books.
We'll find out October 30th.
We will.
That's right. Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween, everybody.
What's your Halloween Beru Cormorant costume going to be, guys? Because I know I'm going as a character from this beloved novel series that everyone will recognize on Halloween night.
I'm just getting a purge mask and pretend that's what the masquerade wears, and then yeah.
Actually, this novel becomes very funny if instead of you see the Empire of Masks, everyone wearing these smooth steel sort of masks. You imagine them all wearing silly Joker clown masks.
Yeah, that's right.
They're all wearing purge masks.
They're all wearing Nixon masks. All right. Well, we have a lot going on here. Thank you all for listening to the inaugural crossover episode of On Top of the World and Dungeon Master of None. Thank you, Dave.
We have crossed the streams. We will never do so again.
Hell yes. Yeah, it was fun, guys.
We've opened a portal.
But yeah, thank you all for listening, and please leave a comment and a review, and email Matt, because he's the only point of contact between these two. So if you have complaints, definitely email him and not me.
Definitely.
I'm a bridge between two worlds. I'm a liminal space, you could say. I'm a transnational podcaster now.
Yep.
So,
but yeah, thanks all for listening, and see you all next time.
Keep rolling those dice or doing history, depending on how you access this podcast.
Yo, Percocet, Miley Percocet, Miley Percocet, rep the set, gotta rep the set, gang, chase a chick, never chase a bitch, chase no bitch, mask on, fuck it, mask on, mask on, fuck it, mask on, Percocet, Miley Percocet, chase a chick, never chase a bitch, chase no bitch, 2 cups, toast out with the gang, from full stops to a whole nother